If you watch a cop drama, you would think that a police chief has like an iron fist type of control over their agency. You would think that, the chief can do whatever they want to investigate officers, respond to misconduct, and fire officers that are engaged in problematic behavior. But the reality is way more complicated. Labor contracts often set the rules of the game when it comes to discipline.
In the past year alone, 1,200 fatal shootings by police have occurred. From 2005 to 2018, of the 97 officers arrested for an on-duty fatal shooting, only 35 were convicted. As officers, often with extensive records of misconduct, have been linked to these fatal encounters, a common thread in each of these cases has been police unions. More specifically, police union contracts. Like any labor union, police unions serve their purpose, often protecting officers who hold high-risk jobs with standard employment protections. Where officer contracts differ is that police conduct on the job directly impacts the public.
The problem is, if you have a clause in your contract that says you can't keep that old information on file or utilize it, you can greatly impair your ability to use risk assessment. And that can have really deadly consequences.
Take Derek Chauvin. Chauvin kept his knee on George Floyd's neck for nearly 8 minutes while on the job as an officer in Minneapolis. Floyd died. The 19-year police veteran had at least 17 misconduct complaints against him, but only 2 known letters of reprimand.
Even if you do succeed in disciplining officers, there's a lot of protections built into public access to those disciplinary records. Often the records are expunged entirely after 6 months, a year, 2 years. When the internal investigators for the police department want to talk to an officer who's been accused of wrongdoing, they have to give him 48 hours notice. Often they have to do things like show him all of the other witness statements they've taken, and sometimes all audio or video recordings before they can interview him. You worry that this means that the officer will have a chance to review all the other evidence and come up with a story that sort of perfectly fits the evidence and exonerates him.
Other provisions include preventing an officer from being interrogated immediately after being involved in an incident, otherwise restricting how, when, or where an officer can be interrogated, and giving officers access to information that civilians do not get prior to being investigated. These findings are not isolated. A 2018 study by University of Oxford found that the number of protections in police contracts was directly and positively correlated with police violence toward the public. Police unions today are a force faced with little opposition, but they weren't always so powerful. In the 1800s, police attempts to form unions were rejected by the American Federation of Labor, and police unions were illegal for the early part of the 20th century. So officers turned to fraternal associations, seeking better working conditions. This changed in the 1950s and 60s when police unions gained the right to bargain collectively. Then came the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, which vary state by state and determine how officers are investigated when accused of misconduct. Law enforcement advocates say these laws protect officers from unfair accusations and guarantee due process. Critics and experts say these laws and provisions have fueled police abuse.
One of the other reasons why these contracts have become such a barrier to accountability in some jurisdictions is because of the fact that we don't have someone at that negotiation table really representing the interests of people most adversely affected by police misconduct.
Rappaport and Russian say there are few entities challenging the role of police unions and union contracts, particularly as police unions have amassed huge political power, donating to candidates in the millions.
What's missing from that equation so often, though, is someone who may put first or prioritize the needs of those who are affected most disparately by police misconduct.
After a summer of unrest, police unions now face an influx of critics, all pressuring unions and cities to rethink their contracts with police departments. Among them, the initiative Campaign Zero, which launched the Nix the Six campaign, an effort to lose 6 major provisions from all police union contracts. Some cities have had success renegotiating with their local police departments. In August 2020, the Austin City Council voted to reduce its police department by $150 million. 2 years prior, Austin was the first city to reject a police union contract.
A slightly more aggressive step would be to say, let's take all of these disciplinary issues and put them outside the scope of collective bargaining. So officers, you can still have a union and you can still bargain over wages and sick time and vacation time and shift length and all of these things. But you're not going to bargain behind closed doors over these disciplinary procedures. These affect the public. They should be fixed by law. And then an even more aggressive position would be, abolish police unions.
While calls to defund the police have met mixed responses, overall, as protests continue, the tone across the country is clear. The public's desire for change is strong, and the time may be now.
I think there's broader political consensus that we have a problem. And again, the fact that we have a problem across a large number of police departments that are in large numbers treating Black and brown residents of their community differently than white residents, because of that recognition and consensus, we're finally in a moment where things can actually change.